This is Ask the Rabbi, edition number 9. First question, on my video about tzniut, Jewish modesty, a bodybuilder, male bodybuilder, said that his hobby, bodybuilding, requires him to wear clothing, although he purposely skips those where it's really skimpy clothing. But he does wear sleeveless shirts and short shorts. It's part of the regular attire. Does he have to give it up to be a good Jew? And I said, well, actually, the tradition's a little more liberal for males, but we're not fanatics. We don't believe the body has to be totally covered, and certainly not Orthodox, where they believe in kind of longer body cover-ups. And so if you are already making the distinction about not going to places where they require skimpy clothing as part of your hobby, it's like biking or swimming, where you wear the attire that's appropriate for that activity, but try and do it in a modest way. So it seems like what you're doing is very appropriate. Number two, somebody asked me about whether the Talmud or Torah has more authority. And they were perplexed by a story they heard about a passage in the Talmud where the rabbis are debating something from the Torah, and even though God clearly sends a message through what's called a bat kol and performs a miracle to side with one rabbi's position, the other rabbis outvote him and win. And God says, I'm happy my children defeated me. They thought that was perplexing. How could even great rabbis defeat something God clearly intended? Well, that's part of the beauty of Judaism, that stories are a rabbinic story to make the point that God gave the Torah. And once God gave the Torah to Moses and the Jewish people, it's up to us to decide how to interpret it, because God's not here to babysit us every minute and tell us. So we use our best analysis as we can to figure out what we should be doing to understand God's will. So in that sense, the Torah, of course, has ultimate authority, but as interpreted by the great sages, the Jewish people who are honestly trying to figure out what God intended. Because there's a lot of things in the Torah that aren't clear. For example, it doesn't tell us how to slaughter an animal to make it kosher, or how big the corners of the field should be to give to the poor. Everything requires interpretation, and that's the oral tradition and the subsequent interpretation by our sages. Next question is, somebody wanted to know if they have a tattoo, can they be buried in a Jewish cemetery? I urge you to watch my video on tattooing and piercing. The answer, according to the conservative rabbis, is yes, you can be buried in a Jewish cemetery with a tattoo, although, and the reason for a tattoo, as I explained in that video, is basically the ancient pagan priests used to wear tattoos, so the Torah didn't like it, because it might remind you of the pagan priests. But in any event, we don't like defiling the body, best to avoid it. Next question. Somebody wanted to know if they converted reform, but they had the Beit Din and the ritual circumcision and the immersion in the mikveh, does it count? I said yes, I believe virtually all conservative rabbis would accept such a conversion. Of course, the Orthodox don't accept anybody's conversions but a few Orthodox, so that wouldn't be okay for them, but for all other Jews, the overwhelming majority would be fine. And then somebody said that they took a class and they read the New Testament and clearly indicates the Jews killed Jesus. So I said, well, you really got to watch. I have many videos on this. Jews didn't kill Jesus, 1, 2, and 3, Jews and Jesus, all kinds of video. Well, how do we know Jews didn't kill Jesus? A lot of videos on this. But basically, first of all, you can't go by the accounts of the New Testament. They were written hundreds of years later. There's contradictions in them. We know why they would change the story to appease the Romans, so they wouldn't be threatened by the Romans. And even so, if even it was a few high priests involved, what does that have to do with me? I don't blame all the Christians for killing, for the Nazis did. Why would you blame Jews 2,000 later for something a handful of priests might have done 2,000 years ago? That kind of corporate guilt is completely sinful, as the Pope in Vatican II clearly said. Anyway, I urge you to watch all my videos on that. Next question was, what evidence do we have Jesus wasn't the Messiah? Well, I have many videos on this too. Jews not for Jesus 1, 2, and 3, Jews and Jesus. But what evidence do you have that he was? I mean, the interpretations from the Torah, the Hebrew Bible never says the word Jesus, and you can interpret those verses many ways. The ways the Christians do we don't think is correct, but that's, up to them. And none of the conditions the Bible says for the Messiah came true when Jesus came. It never mentions there would be a second coming. So if Christians want to believe he's the Messiah, fine, but why in the world would Jews believe that? And I also make the point that what sense does it make for somebody to say Jesus is the Messiah? I mean, Muslims believe they have the different Messiah and the Mormons and the Moonies. Why would you believe just one old rabbi? I mean, we have Lubavitch Hasidim, some of whom believe their dead rabbi is the Messiah. And as I pointed out in my videos, I have relatives in Israel, Bratslaver Hasidim, who believe their dead rabbi from 200 years ago is the Messiah. So why would you think this one particular guy is the Messiah, even if a billion people believe it? Then somebody asked me about the 10 Sfirot. That is a mystical term for the 10 emanations of God. And you can watch my video on basic mystical emanations. But that requires thorough, even 5-minute videos can't, of course, do it justice, further explanations about it. Then somebody said, again, that they saw a website of anti-Semites who quote verses from the Talmud saying the Talmud says bad things. Well, there's a lot of, thank goodness, sites on the internet now which show how all of those are lies and can be easily disproven. Anti-Semites love to quote things out of context because their goal, of course, is to make Judaism look bad. And I referred that person to the sites on the internet where you can find them. Finally, somebody wanted to know about some of the differences between Reform and Conservative. And I have videos, several videos on that. I have one on Reform, one on Conservative, one on is Reform becoming conservative. And even though Reform seems like it's going to be more traditional, it still is not. Their synagogues still, by and large, aren't kosher. They only observe one day of the 2 days of Yontif. They don't require a Jewish divorce when there's a civil divorce. Some of their rabbis do intermarriages. They don't have the musaf in their services. They will marry 2 people even if one doesn't have a get. So there's a lot of basic differences between the two. There's some philosophical differences. You can watch my videos about that. Well, those are my issues that questions raised for the Ask the Rabbi edition, volume number 9. Thank you.